and welcome to another episode of This Week in Cleantech, a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, August 30th, 2024. Labor Day weekend is just around the corner. I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Engel. We have Dan Gearino from Inside Climate News coming back to the show in just a few minutes. But for now, I'm joined by Cleantech PR veteran Mike Casey of Terrorgram with a fresh haircut, a great attitude, and a wonderful smile. Hi, Mike.
Mr. Engel, you are so much nicer once we start rolling tape on this show than you are before. Like you throw all this shade just before we get on, and you get me off balance. You kind of like treat me like JD Vance. You know,
I'm a pro. This is what a pro is.
All right,
to the people, I'm nice and humble. Clearly on this show. I don't think that's actually true. I think I'm much nicer behind the scenes than I am to you once we start recording, because I'm usually lashing you back and forth. But it is always very good to see you. Mike, before we start going further, give us a rundown of your RE Plus plans, because I unfortunately can't be there, but I know you have a couple of episodes planned.
Yeah, I think I don't want to get out over our skis, but I think we got a couple of really great journalist guests that are going to be there, and we will be taping episode 50 with Paul Gerke, which Clarion has privately messaged me and says they're slotting to replace you with him. So
that's honestly, it's fine with me. I got enough going on. If this is my last show, to all of you listening, I've loved you every step of the way.
You went all Nicolas Maduro on me last week. When I raised that, you're like, I'll just fire him.
I can't fire him. That'll make even more work for me. All right, I know you have some flowers to throw out too.
I got some special guests here. Hold on. Action Cam in our multi-million-dollar studio. Alex Peterson, Claire Quinn.
They're the people that make Mike sound intelligent every single week.
No one can make me sound intelligent. That's just don't put him up to an impossible
You're a
task.
smart guy.
All right, I want to say shout out to Brian Lusher of Duke Energy. Told me recently, I've been a listener of This Week in Cleantech for a while. I recently heard the VPP episode, which is my area of focus. Also, shout out to listener Paul Larder. He works for a SaaS startup and has been listening to the show from the south of Ireland. How cool is that, John?
Very cool. And we want to hear from more of our listeners, so send us those emails to rew@clarionevents.com. You can suggest stories we should cover and nominate Clean Techers of the Week. We'll have that link in the episode description as well. All right, Mike, let's get started.
Jeff Stone writes, far-right Terrorgram chat rooms fuel wave of power grid attacks. We picked the story before the arrest of the Telegraph CEO in France. So, man, I'll tell you, talk about some great timing here. Wow. We got 2 Duke Energy substations in December 22 that were shot at, hitting sensitive pieces of tech. The attack caused 45,000 families to lose power for 4 days. Although the case remains unsolved, police have described both instances as a coordinated attack. It highlights a growing trend of far-right groups targeting power infrastructure to create chaos. The attack was discussed on the social media platform Telegram, which hosts a network of channels known as Terrorgrams, where people promote violent supremacist ideology and instructions on how to use weapons to attack power infrastructure. John?
Yeah, it's no easy thing to maintain a power grid in the 21st century. Replacing old infrastructure, switching to distributed and intermittent generation, adding huge new loads for things like data centers and the EVs, protecting against extreme weather that's increasing with climate change, and now an increasing threat of terrorism. These types of attacks have spiked recently. Power companies reporting that there were 185 attacks or threats to grid infrastructure in 2023, more than twice as many in 2021. Now power companies are racing to defend themselves. NERC, the reliability monitor for North America, recently had 250 participants join an emergency simulation, and the DOE said they dedicate $70 million to help with grid resiliency, but these attacks are becoming more and more difficult to defend against, and with an upcoming election, extremists are just getting started conspiring online, but hopefully that does not lead to the lights going out for day-to-day people. Mike, number 2.
Brian Deese, Foreign Affairs, the case for a clean energy Marshall Plan. John Engel?
Here we go. 76 years ago, the Marshall Plan was launched by U.S. President Harry Truman and U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall to subsidize European demand for U.S. products and services needed to help rebuild post-war Europe. Now, former White House National Economic Council Director Brian Deese argues The U.S. should draw lessons from that plan and use it for the energy transition. Just as the 1948 Marshall Plan helped countries impacted most by World War II, a new Marshall Plan could help support countries most vulnerable to global climate destruction. Mike, what do you think of this one?
Mr. Deese is in the Brett Christopher's camp in thinking that markets won't enable us to make enough progress fast enough. He might be right. Don't know. Certainly others would disagree, but he proposes creating authorities to subsidize foreign demand for American clean energy products to secure more resilient global supply chains for critical minerals, which are currently dominated by China. He also recommends the use of carbon-based tariffs to ensure countries reduce overall pollution, with China being the most affected due to its high levels of carbon pollution. Deese's plan positions the U.S. to leverage its economic strength to lead the energy transition. However, the geopolitical landscape is complicated, to say the least, which could make another Marshall Plan a nearly impossible task. John, our third story.
Yeah, this one's from Maeve Alsup, another former guest of the show at Latitude Media, titled Scoop, Swell is shutting down. This was a surprising story this week, Mike.
Yeah, virtual power plant company Swell is closing its doors. They laid off their staff only 6 months after acquiring Renew Energy and expanding into the Southeast. The company raised $100 million in equity and teamed up with some VPP deployments just 2 years ago. The VPP market is still young, making it difficult for startups to succeed. Unlike established players like Sunrun and Tesla, which have solid foundation for the existing solar and storage technology, Swell was starting from scratch. John?
Yeah, great scoop by Maeve, too. Excuse me. I reached out to a couple of the utilities that we know are partnered with Swell on their virtual power plants. I think Hawaiian Electric and SMUD are both two of the ones that come to mind, but I think there are others. So trying to figure out what the broader implications are here. But this closure reflects broader challenges within the distributed energy storage and VPP markets, which are still evolving and struggling to establish sustainable business models. Swell's strategy of building its VPP platform via channel partners rather than leveraging an existing customer base may have contributed to its shuttering. But nonetheless, Mike, giant is probably not the right word, but a really big player to fall. It's been a summer for that. So
it has.
Hopefully that's not a sign of things to come more broadly for the sector. Mike, number 4.
Brad Plumer, New York Times, hungry for clean energy. Facebook looks at a new type of geothermal. Boy, John, I think this is a big one.
Yeah, the energy demands of data centers. Also, I want to propose a new drinking game for this podcast, any other energy podcast, and really just energy conversations in general. If you hear data centers, just take a poll from there, and we'll see how quickly we have to scrape Mike Casey off the floor at RE+. So the energy demands of data centers are so great that some of the biggest users, Google and Meta, are investing in new ways to get clean power. We've talked about enhanced geothermal before, using advanced oil and gas drilling techniques to tap the heat deep below the Earth's surface and use it to create clean electricity. On Monday, Meta unveiled a new partnership with the startup Sage Geosystems to provide 150 megawatts of geothermal to their data centers. Sage has plans to build its first large-scale power plant in 2027. Google has partnered with another geothermal startup, Fervo Energy, to build a 5-megawatt plant. Mike, your thoughts here?
So the big tech companies played a big role during the Trump years in developing clean energy and keeping the energy transition going, and they're playing a big role again here. Their data centers are predicted to use up to 9% of all America's electricity consumption by 2030, and that's probably an understatement. Last week, we talked about how the Greenhouse Gas Protocol sets rules for carbon accounting, and they may have to switch it to a system that matches clean energy credits with time and place of the generation. That's probably not a coincidence, and now these companies are looking for a firm source of clean power that can run 24/7 near their data centers. I think we're going to just be talking about data centers from now till the end of this show, John, whenever that is in the future. It's still a very new technology, but the commercial and technological progress of advanced geothermal is exciting. We've talked about that on the show before. A lot of potential. DOE estimates we'd be getting 90 gigawatts of geothermal by 2050, but at this point, it just receives a fraction of the funding that other technologies like hydrogen nuclear get.
All right, story number 5, Mike, and our reporter this week, Dan Gearino from Inside Climate News with the story, Want an EV with 600 miles of range? It's coming. Dan, it's great to see you once again. You're on our Mount Rushmore of reporter guests at this point. I'm sure there will be many other appearances, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, great to be here.
So we switched up the order in teasing this story this week. So I get to ask Mike's hard hitting question of, even though we want everyone to read your story, if they haven't, what is the biggest takeaway? How did I do there, Mike? Was that pretty close?
It's okay.
Okay.
It just some rookie action, but it's okay.
Yeah. All right.
Let's Mr. Gearino answer.
The big takeaway would be that solid state batteries, which has been this technology that has been talked about, research has been working on it for a long time, certainly the entire time I've been covering this stuff. They're really close. It's 2024 right now. 2027 is when we are going to see some of these come to market based on current estimates. Now, I also know from experience that you might just want to nudge that back a little bit, but still, even 2028 is pretty soon. 2029 is pretty soon. And this is a technology that, when it arrives, is potentially revolutionary for electric transportation, because you can have batteries that will go further. You will have batteries that can charge faster. You have lower fire risk. You also could have batteries that are a lot smaller. You could have a battery that's half the size, a third the size, but packs so much energy into it, it has pretty good range. So it creates opportunities for all kinds of ways to make EVs more enticing. And we have now entered this kind of time frame where it's right here. We're talking about the presidential election this year. It will be during this next presidential term. I mean, really soon. So, yeah.
Dan, how do you see the solid state batteries changing? Clearly, they have the potential to bring big change. But if you had to name the biggest change they'll bring first, what's your reporting tell you?
So the biggest change, I think, is, and we're also seeing semi-solid state batteries that also have really long ranges. So I want to kind of include that in the conversation, because the larger theme here is that there will be this broadening acknowledgement that electric vehicles will be able to have ranges that are longer than most gasoline vehicles. And once, at least the kinds of gasoline vehicles I've ever driven. I mean, there must be some gasoline vehicles that have an absolute ton of range because they just have a lot of room in the gas tank. But when ranges become so incredibly long, it just changes the paradigm of how we think about so many of the issues around EVs. And when, I mean, you think of what's normal range now, 200 plus miles or so, or when normal range is, say, 400 plus miles, or normal range is 500 plus miles, it's just a different conversation. And that's the big thing. And whether it be semi-solid state batteries or solid state batteries, we know that the ranges aren't going to go down. We know that, we also know then that when you have these batteries, you could have a battery that's maybe a quarter the size or half the size, a battery pack that's, substantially smaller than what there is now. So you could have really, small vehicles. And I'm talking about in the global market, you could have small vehicles that are really affordable. So it's just, you look across the different barriers to adoption. These next generation batteries could address almost every single issue.
Well, and that's what it seems to be, Dan, in my reading of your story, was all around messaging. Like, the applications for a 600-mile range EVs are so slim. Like, the number of trips where that is of greatest value, it has to be like less than, I don't know, 0.1% when we look at total trips. I'm driving to Mike's beloved Ohio for Labor Day weekend. God help me. That's 7 hours, 6.5 hours, and 400 something miles. So I was just even thinking about it in the context of my own habits and needs. And I know that you included some dissenting opinions too in the piece that basically pointed to, do we really even need a breakthrough in solid state? We're making significant innovations on the tech we already have that is commercially viable and making these kind of incremental advancements. So I'm not sure if you can share a little bit more context around those.
I think there are other examples in clean tech that we've seen over the last couple decades where you've seen interesting other conversations you see with some like solar panel technologies. There's this kind of like, oh, I don't know, it's more expensive. It's sure you get some efficiency benefits, but you see, I think the ability to develop and then eventually drive the cost down for technologies that have all these benefits. I mean, you can have both things. Both things meaning existing battery technologies can get better, and we're talking about ranges that are beyond what anyone needs. But you also could, at the same time, be developing these technologies that would kind of redefine how we think about charging and what charging infrastructure should look like, and just costs. How big a battery pack is. I mean, so much of an EV these days is this idea of this super heavy, gigantic battery pack. I mean, it might be that the real change that happens here is that the batteries just get really small, or get smaller. I don't know. But yeah, it's we're talking about a kind of change that it's like almost all of the results are good. We don't quite know when you unleash a technological change like this. You don't quite know what's going to happen. You don't quite know how the market receives it. But I don't see an outcome where this is harmful in any way. I mean, it's like all roads point to increasing desirability of EVs. So, yeah.
Dan, last question. Any impact that your reporting suggests for heavy vehicles, big industrial trucks or buses or even aviation? Does this make electrification of aviation possible with a much smaller battery size?
So the short answer is yes. There's a much, much longer answer that we don't really have time for.
Gotcha.
But yeah. So yeah, the short answer is definitely yes.
John, we're just about out of time. We need to go to our Cleantecher of the week.
Yeah, Cleantech of the week this week is Emily Oxel O'Leary, founder of Green Clean Wind. Emily is actively urging her LinkedIn followers to reach out for their solar recycling needs, highlighting the growing concern over solar components ending up in landfills. So congratulations to Emily, and help her out. Give her a call.
All right, Emily. I want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin here in the studios with us.
Yeah, and of course, thanks to Dan Gearino for joining us on another episode of This Week in Clean Tech, his third appearance. We'll see. Maybe we can get Dan to get a little spicy, too. Or after coming on the show this many times, I think we develop an edge within the reporter.
We'll see.
Maybe next time. All right. Please subscribe, give us feedback, and share those story recommendations. And you can read all of the articles we discussed this week, including Dan's, by clicking the links in the episode description. All right, Mike, good luck at RE+.
Thank you, friend.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you in 3 weeks. Take care. Bye.